What's up, narrative analysts? Jax here, and we need to talk about something that's been brewing beneath the surface in Indiana. Because while everyone's been focused on Caitlin Clark's injury recovery and the Fever's playoff push, there's a completely different story unfolding that nobody wants to address. Sophie Cunningham's fierce protection of Caitlin isn't just creating enemies anymore. It's actively making everything worse for the very player she's trying to defend. And before you click away, thinking this is just another hot take, I've been filtering through the digital breadcrumbs for weeks, and the signals are crystal clear. What started as loyal teammate support has escalated into something that's putting both players in impossible positions, creating fractures within the organization, and potentially damaging Caitlin's reputation in ways that no amount of on-court success can fix. So if you're ready to dive deep into the meta-narrative that's actually shaping the Fever's future, hit that subscribe button, because we're about to pull back the curtain on how good intentions can spiral into destructive cycles. And trust me, by the end of this video, you'll understand why Sophie's next move might determine whether Caitlin Clark's rookie season ends in triumph or controversy. Let's start with what we know for certain. Sophie Cunningham built her entire WNBA identity as an enforcer, the kind of player who will absorb a technical foul without blinking if it sends a message to anyone targeting her teammates. When Caitlin Clark joined the Fever, Sophie immediately positioned herself as the rookie's primary protector, making it clear through both words and actions that anyone coming for Caitlin would have to go through her first. And initially, this dynamic worked beautifully. Sophie's reputation provided Caitlin with the psychological safety to focus on basketball while knowing she had backup. The veteran's willingness to step into confrontations allowed the rookie to maintain her composure during those brutal early season adjustment periods. It was textbook veteran leadership, the kind of mentorship that helps rookies survive their first year. But here's where things get complicated, and this is what the mainstream coverage consistently misses. Sophie's protection strategy was designed for a different type of rookie, one who needed shielding from physical intimidation and on-court aggression. What she didn't anticipate was that Caitlin Clark's challenges would extend far beyond basketball, into social media scrutiny, media narratives, and institutional politics that can't be solved with a well-timed screen or an aggressive foul. The temperature of the online conversation shifted dramatically once Sophie started responding to every perceived slight against Caitlin. We're talking about quote tweets defending Caitlin's shooting slumps, public call-outs of officials, and increasingly heated exchanges with fans and media members who dared to criticize the rookie's performance. Each defensive move, while well-intentioned, added fuel to narratives that were already spiraling beyond anyone's control. Now, I want to be transparent about something here. Official sources won't tell you this, but if you follow the digital breadcrumbs, a different picture emerges about how this protection dynamic is actually functioning within the organization. Because while Sophie's public statements position her as simply supporting a teammate, the reality is that her increasingly aggressive advocacy is creating complications that the Fever's front office never signed up to manage. Think about it from the organization's perspective. Every time Sophie escalates a situation in defense of Caitlin, the team has to allocate resources to damage control. Media relations staff who should be focusing on playoff positioning are instead fielding calls about controversial tweets. Coaching staff who need to concentrate on game preparation are mediating between players with different approaches to handling public criticism. And here's the part that really complicates everything. Caitlin Clark herself has never publicly asked for this level of protection. In fact, if you analyze her media appearances carefully, you'll notice that she consistently tries to de-escalate situations that Sophie has amplified. The rookie's diplomatic responses to controversial questions often directly contrast with her teammates' more combative approach, creating a narrative tension that benefits no one. But the story doesn't end there, because the unintended consequences extend far beyond simple media management issues. Sophie's fierce defense has actually made Caitlin a bigger target for criticism, not a smaller one. Critics now have a two-for-one opportunity, attacking both the rookie's performance and her teammates' behavior in defense of that performance. Let me break down exactly how this protection backfire mechanism works, because it's become a predictable cycle that repeats every few weeks. Caitlin faces legitimate basketball criticism, which is normal for any rookie navigating professional sports. Sophie responds aggressively to that criticism, elevating what should be routine commentary into a larger controversy. The elevated attention brings more scrutiny to both players, creating additional pressure that affects their on-court performance. That performance dip generates more criticism, and the cycle begins again. And we've seen this pattern play out multiple times throughout the season. Remember when Caitlin struggled with her three-point shooting percentage during that mid-season stretch? Instead of allowing the rookie to work through it quietly with coaching staff, Sophie's public defense of those shooting numbers turned a routine development challenge into a weeks-long media narrative about expectations and pressure. The temperature of the online conversation around that situation became so heated that it overshadowed Caitlin's actual improvement work. Instead of focusing on her technical adjustments and progress, fans and media spent their energy debating whether criticism of her shooting was fair or unfair. Sophie's protection turned a basketball story into a controversy story. Here's what I've been noticing by reading the signals from team insiders and league sources. The relationship dynamics within the Fever are becoming increasingly complex because of this protection pattern. Other veterans are caught between supporting their teammates and managing their own relationships with media and fans. Coaching staff are trying to balance respecting Sophie's leadership instincts while preventing her defensive reactions from creating unnecessary distractions. And that brings us to the inevitable question: what happens when good intentions create bad outcomes? Because that's exactly what we're witnessing here. Sophie Cunningham's loyalty to Caitlin Clark is absolutely genuine, but her execution of that loyalty is generating consequences that neither player anticipated or wanted. The most concerning aspect of this situation is how it's affecting team chemistry during a critical period. While the Fever are fighting for playoff positioning with multiple players dealing with injuries, including Caitlin's ongoing groin injury management, they're also navigating internal tensions created by conflicting approaches to public relations and media strategy. Okay, now let's get into rumor territory. Nothing is officially confirmed, but the online chatter is too loud to ignore about friction developing between different factions within the organization regarding how to handle Sophie's protective instincts. Some sources suggest that coaching staff have had private conversations with both players about finding more sustainable ways to support each other without escalating external conflicts. And if those rumors have any basis in reality, it would explain some of the subtle shifts we've observed in recent weeks. Sophie's social media activity has become notably more measured, her post-game comments more carefully worded, and her on-court reactions slightly more controlled. Meanwhile, Caitlin has started taking more proactive approaches to addressing criticism herself, rather than allowing others to speak for her. But here's where it gets really interesting from a meta-narrative perspective. The irony of Sophie's protection strategy is that it's actually undermining the very thing she's trying to accomplish. Instead of allowing Caitlin to develop her own voice and approach to handling adversity, the constant intervention has created a dynamic where the rookie's independence gets questioned. Critics now point to Sophie's defensive reactions as evidence that Caitlin can't handle professional basketball pressure without help. What was intended as support has become a talking Point for those who want to diminish the rookie's achievements. The protection has become a vulnerability in the hands of people who were already looking for reasons to criticize. And this creates a particularly cruel bind for both players. If Sophie stops defending Caitlin, critics will claim she's abandoned her teammate during difficult times. If she continues the current approach, critics will use that defense as evidence that Caitlin needs special treatment. There's literally no winning scenario under the current dynamic. The temperature of the online conversation has reached a point where every interaction between these players gets analyzed for signs of tension or conflict. Fans dissect their body, language during timeouts, interpret their social media posts for hidden meanings, and create elaborate theories about their relationship based on minimal evidence. This level of scrutiny is exhausting for everyone involved, and it's exactly the kind of pressure that can derail both individual performance and team chemistry. When players start worrying about how their actions will be interpreted rather than focusing on basketball, everyone suffers. So what's fact and what's speculation? Let's break it down objectively. It's a fact that Sophie Cunningham has consistently positioned herself as Caitlin Clark's primary advocate and protector. It's a fact that this advocacy has sometimes escalated situations rather than de-escalating them. It's a fact that both players are dealing with increased scrutiny as a result of these dynamics. But it's speculation to assume that this is creating irreparable damage to their relationship or the team's chemistry. It's speculation to believe that coaching staff are actively intervening to change these dynamics. And it's speculation to predict how this situation will ultimately resolve itself. What we can say with certainty is that the current approach is unsustainable during a playoff push. Something has to give. Whether that's Sophie's protective instincts, Caitlin's acceptance of that protection, or the organization's tolerance for the complications it creates. I've been connecting the dots between various incidents throughout the season, and there's a clear pattern of escalation that suggests this situation is approaching a critical decision point. The Fever can't afford to have their two most prominent players caught in a cycle of controversy during the most important games of the year. And here's what makes this story even more compelling from a narrative perspective. Both players are dealing with their own individual challenges that get overshadowed by the drama surrounding their relationship. Caitlin is managing injury recovery while trying to maintain her performance standards. Sophie is balancing her natural leadership instincts with the realities of modern social media and public relations. The tragedy of the current situation is that both players' genuine strengths are being weaponized against them. Caitlin's competitiveness gets framed as inability to handle criticism. Sophie's loyalty gets portrayed as overprotectiveness. Neither characterization is fair, but both are consequences of how their dynamic has evolved. Official sources won't tell you this, but if you follow the digital breadcrumbs, there are signs that both players are becoming more aware of how their interactions affect not just themselves, but their teammates and the organization as a whole. Recent interviews show more careful consideration of their public statements and a more collaborative approach to handling controversial topics. That brings us to the inevitable question about what comes next, because this situation can't continue indefinitely without resolution. The Fever are facing too many legitimate basketball challenges to allow relationship dynamics to become an ongoing distraction. And honestly, the solution probably isn't as complicated as everyone is making it seem. Both players need to develop more sustainable approaches to supporting each other that don't create additional external pressure. Sophie can maintain her protective instincts while being more strategic about when and how she expresses them. Caitlin can take more ownership of her public narrative while still appreciating her teammates' support. But implementing those changes requires acknowledging that the current approach isn't working, which can be difficult for competitive athletes, who are used to doubling down when faced with criticism rather than adapting their strategies. The real test will be how both players navigate the final stretch of the season, when every game matters and there's no room for unforced errors, either on the court or in the media. The Fever's playoff hopes depend not just on their basketball performance, but on their ability to maintain focus despite all the external noise. And here's where the meta-narrative gets really fascinating. If Sophie and Caitlin can figure out how to channel their competitive instincts and mutual loyalty into a more constructive dynamic, they could actually emerge stronger from this situation. The adversity they're facing together could become a bonding experience that makes their partnership more resilient. But if they can't find that balance, this protection dynamic could continue escalating until it becomes the defining storyline of both their seasons, overshadowing their actual basketball achievements and creating lasting complications for their relationship and their team. I've been filtering through the noise, and the signals point to a critical decision point approaching rapidly. The next few weeks will likely determine whether this situation resolves itself naturally or requires more direct intervention from coaching staff and front office personnel. Because here's what the mainstream coverage consistently misses about these kinds of teammate dynamics. They're not just about the two players involved. They affect every aspect of the organization, from game preparation to media strategy to fan engagement to playoff positioning. When veteran leadership strategies don't match rookie development needs, the entire team feels the impact. When media narratives become more important than basketball narratives, everyone's performance suffers. When good intentions create bad outcomes, the path forward requires honest evaluation and strategic adjustment. And that's exactly what the Fever are facing right now. They have two talented players who genuinely care about each other and want to succeed together, but they're trapped in a dynamic that's working against their shared goals. The temperature of the online conversation suggests that fans are starting to recognize this pattern too. Instead of taking sides in the Sophie versus critics debates, more people are asking questions about how this dynamic can be improved for everyone's benefit. That shift in fan perspective could actually provide the opening that both players need to recalibrate their approach without losing face or admitting failure. Sometimes, external pressure can create space for internal change if it's channeled constructively. Now, let me be clear about something. None of this analysis is meant to criticize either player's character or intentions. Sophie Cunningham's loyalty to her teammates is admirable, and Caitlin Clark's grace under pressure has been remarkable throughout her rookie season. The issue isn't their individual qualities, it's how those qualities interact with the modern sports media environment. But recognizing the problem is the first step toward solving it, and both players have shown the intelligence and adaptability needed to make strategic adjustments when necessary. The question is whether they'll make those adjustments before or after the current dynamic creates more serious complications. Looking ahead, there are several potential scenarios for how this situation could develop. The optimistic scenario involves both players finding a more sustainable balance without external intervention, learning from recent experiences, and applying those lessons going forward. The realistic scenario probably involves some combination of internal team discussions, media strategy adjustments, and gradual changes in how both players approach public situations. Not dramatic shifts, but incremental improvements that reduce the risk of future escalations. The concerning scenario would involve this dynamic continuing to escalate until it becomes a significant distraction during the playoffs, potentially affecting not just individual performance, but team chemistry during the most important games of the year. And based on what I've been observing, the Fever organization seems committed to the optimistic scenario, providing both players with the support and guidance they need to navigate these challenges successfully. But that success isn't guaranteed, and it will require continued effort from everyone involved. Veterans need to adapt their leadership styles to match rookie development needs. Rookies need to take more ownership of their public narratives. Organizations need to provide clear guidance without micromanaging player relationships. The good news is that both Sophie and Caitlin have shown the maturity and professionalism needed to handle these kinds of adjustments. They're both intelligent players who understand that their individual success is connected to team success, and team success requires effective collaboration both on and off the court. Official sources won't tell you this, but if you follow the digital breadcrumbs, there are signs that the learning process is already underway. Recent interactions between the players show more awareness of how their dynamic affects others, and more strategic thinking about when and how to address external criticism. That evolution suggests that this story might have a more positive resolution than current headlines would indicate. Sometimes the most dramatic narratives are actually the ones closest to natural resolution, because the pressure they create forces everyone involved to find better solutions. So here's what I want you to take away from this deep dive into the Sophie-Caitlin protection dynamic. First, good intentions don't automatically create good outcomes, especially in the complex environment of professional sports and social media scrutiny. Second, veteran leadership and rookie development require constant adjustment and communication to remain effective. What works in one situation might not work in another, and successful partnerships require ongoing adaptation. Third, team chemistry isn't just about on-court performance. It's about how players support each other through adversity while maintaining focus on shared goals. When that balance gets disrupted, everyone feels the impact. And finally, the most interesting stories in sports are often about how people navigate challenging relationships and evolving dynamics, not just about wins and losses on the scoreboard. The Fever's playoff push will be shaped as much by how Sophie and Caitlin resolve this protection paradox as by their basketball performance. And honestly, that makes their remaining games even more compelling to watch, because we're not just seeing athletic competition, we're seeing human beings figuring out how to work together under pressure. That's the kind of meta-narrative that makes sports more than just entertainment. It makes them a reflection of how we all learn to support each other while pursuing our individual and collective goals. And on that note, I want to hear your perspective on this situation. Have you noticed the escalation pattern I've been describing? Do you think Sophie's protection strategy has been helpful or harmful overall? And what adjustments would you recommend for both players going forward? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because the narrative analysts community always brings insights that I missed during my initial analysis. Your perspective on these relationship dynamics helps everyone understand the situation more completely. If this kind of behind-the-scenes analysis resonates with you, make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on, because we're going to continue following this story as it develops throughout the playoff push. The next few weeks are going to be crucial for determining how this protection dynamic ultimately resolves itself. And if you found value in this deep dive, sharing it with other WNBA fans helps more people understand the complex human stories that shape what we see on the court. Sometimes the most important narratives are the ones that require the most careful investigation to uncover. Thanks for diving deep with me today, narrative analysts. This is Jax, reminding you that the most fascinating stories in sports are often about how people learn to be better teammates, not just better players. And the Sophie-Caitlin situation is a perfect example of that ongoing evolution. Keep connecting the dots, keep questioning the surface narratives, and keep supporting the players who are figuring out how to navigate this complex world of professional athletics. We'll be back soon with more insights that the mainstream coverage leaves unexplored.